Hello, I'm Doreen. I'm a very grateful member of the Worldwide Association of Al-Anon. This is a fabulous family, and as anyone will tell you, anybody can belong to AA, but you have to know someone to get into Al-Anon. It's really wonderful to look out and see so many faces that I know and love, and many of you I've known for a long time. Some of you I've just recently met. And that's one of the true gifts of this program, is that it keeps giving relationally. We think we've got a full slate of friends and support people, and in fact, you'll meet someone else at the end of the day or tomorrow or whenever. What I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to tell you my story, and for those of you that have heard it before, I'm sorry, because history doesn't change much. Not much has happened, since the last time I spoke. But I'll talk about what it was like, what happened, what it's like now, obviously. And I'm a little tangential, but I will ultimately cover all those points. And luckily, they let me start an hour early, so I presume that the implication is that I can speak for double time. Just joshing. But I'm here literally and figuratively because I absolutely adore alcoholics. I cannot stress that enough. I've always been attracted to them. I guess it's because of their general colorful personalities, but it's just something that I've just got this uncanny ability to scope them out. You can put me in a room with 500 people and I will very systematically go through. I'll talk to people, I'm quasi-social, and I will hone in on the alcoholics. It's just the way it is. I like that type of personality. I heard a speaker once say this, and I think it's so true. You can always differentiate between alcoholics and Al-Anons because alcoholics have so many fabulous personalities. And Al-Anons have one or none. So anyway, to make a long story short, I befriend them, I date them, I marry them, I give birth to them, whatever it takes. And I want to fix them. I want to smooth over their rough edges. I want to make them better. I can, really turn the corner with a lot of things. And I don't want the easy, low-hanging fruit. I want the hard cases, the ones that really are problematic. And I want to just wave some magic dust over them. And the good thing is, that's a nice little melding for me because that feeds a lot of my personality defects. And believe me, I've got quite a few. So it's always been mutually beneficial. But as much as I love Bill W. and Dr. Bob, it's really Lois who's my friend, because Lois is the one that taught me that it was okay for me to continue loving alcoholics and loving myself. I didn't think that could coexist. I thought I had to pick one or the other. I didn't know anything about detachment when I first came into these rooms, and it's something that really has changed my life. I grew up in kind of a, a boring family, really. I'm always surprised when people even ask to hear my story because it is so blah. But I was, we were just a normal little family. My dad was a chemical engineer. My mother was a housewife. She taught school before she got married. We had 3 children. I was the eldest. And in my family, that was a big deal, being the firstborn. My dad was the firstborn. I was the firstborn. It seems ludicrous for that to be an honored spot, since that's truly just chance as to who's born first. But I wasn't around a lot of alcohol in my family growing up. There were legends about alcoholic relatives. My paternal grandfather died at the age of 40 from a heart attack that was obviously alcohol related. I had an uncle that was an alcoholic. But my parents didn't drink much. Occasionally they'd have a barbecue in the summer and, they'd ice down beer and soft drinks and stuff, but it wasn't really that big a deal. But the thing that was real alcoholic about my family is that everyone in the family was driven by this intense desire, I guess, for perfectionism. And of course, that's an elusive goal right there. And you were encouraged to overachieve. There were a lot of rules in our family, and you had to decode them yourself. They were unwritten rules, but the main thing was that exemplary behavior was always expected. You could never do too much. You could never be too good. You could never be too well-spoken. You could never be too bright. And I guess the mantra was, to whom much is given, much is expected. Or don't be doomed to mediocrity. Or it only costs a few cents more to go first class. And there but for the grace of God go I. So while you're trying to better yourself, you also need to have a handout to help someone else. And, in many ways, that's just kind of, I guess, the human condition. You always do want to better yourself and you want to help other people around you. I often hear now, well, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And my response is, I am happy when I'm right. So basically, I was being groomed to be an overachiever. What I was not being groomed for per se was to find an alcoholic and enable them or save them or whatever. But that's where I went. We were very social. We had a lot of parties. My parents encouraged us to entertain at our house. My mother was the queen of snacks and soft drinks, and we always had people around. And I remember as a child, the ice cream man used to stop in front of our house. That was one of the stops in the neighborhood. And all the kids would come over when the ice cream truck bells were going off. And I think my mother pretty well underwrote most everyone's ice cream. But people would just eat it and, enjoy themselves and throw the trash all over the yard, which wouldn't have bothered me except every afternoon when my dad got home from work. He thought it'd be a great little activity for us to go frolicking around the yard and pick up all the trash. Well, that irritated the hell out of me. I had a strong drive for justice, and it seemed like, I put my garbage in a nicely designed receptacle. And all these other people, and I could tell you who ate that popsicle and who ate this Nutty Buddy, because I knew what all my friends ordered every time. And I thought we ought to just call the offenders and tell them to come tidy up the area, but my dad thought that was a real petty solution. So we referred to that as the Popsicle Project. And we just left the campsite cleaner than we found it. When I was 12, something changed for our family in that my dad was transferred to Australia. So we picked up and we moved overseas. And we kind of had to tone down that familial cockiness, because here we were now visitors in a foreign land, and we were trying not to, overstate the ugly American persona. But we still had to be perfect, just in a more casual, humble, low-key manner. And of course, I laugh when I say that because none of us were anywhere near perfect. We never will be. But we weren't even, there's some people, you probably know friends that are kind of close to being perfect. Well, I wasn't that kind of friend. I was way, way, way off from being perfect. But anyway, and Australia was different. Drinking there is a national sport, and people entertain with alcohol all the time. And we lived in this little bitty town, and there was only one restaurant in town, and my parents had dinner parties all the time, business related. So, there was more and more glamorization of it, and I was certainly exposed more to alcohol then. And more importantly was to me was that it was becoming more normalized. We had, one time I had a problem, and I had something stuck in my ear, and it was a weekend, and our little one-horse town had one doctor, and he was at his farm for the weekend. So my mother called him and said, hey, look, Doreen's got this thing in her ear. He said, well, look, I'll be home Sunday. I can get it out, but you have to come and meet me at the office with a case of beer. And the best thing was, we had a case of beer. It was chilled. It was easy just to take it out of the fridge and put it in the car and bring it up there to him, and he got the thing out of my ear. But those were just, examples of the things that happened all the time. Someone ran over our dog after a dinner party, and it was no big deal. I mean, the dog lived. The dog had to have expensive surgery. The dog limped for the rest of her life. But it was just like, well, that's just kind of one of the prices we pay to party. So, everyone was drinking more, but things were going pretty well. I started going to teenage parties where alcohol was readily available, and I got drunk one night, the first time I'd ever gotten drunk, and I very grandiosely invited all my friends to come back to my house, and I was going to fix some Irish coffee. And I knew we'd have the ingredients for Irish coffee at my house, because we always had all those ingredients. And we even had some very special little mugs that, were decorated for Irish coffee. So everyone came back to my house, and in the midst of preparations, I got sick. And my mother had to get out of bed and come and kind of, finish off the party for me. And you'd think that I would have been upset about that. No, I was very grateful that she stepped in. But it was at that point that I decided I could not drink, because it was much more important for me to be a good hostess and to be able to be the savior, so to speak, and help my drunk friends than it was for me to get drunk. I couldn't tolerate the idea of losing control. So I didn't make a declaration that I wasn't going to drink. I was much more suave about it. I didn't want to look like a big fat nerd. So I just, pretended like I was drinking. At parties, I would, slosh some jungle juice in plants, or just, kind of nurse my drink or whatever. And I thought, as long as I'm fake drinking, I still fit in, but I'm able to control things. And I discovered incidentally that being the soberest one in my friends group gave me a lot of power. And there is nothing I love more than power. So, everyone ran to me if there was something to fix, or if they needed someone to drive them home. And I could also proactively do things to avert a crisis. It was wonderful. I mean, I was just indispensable. I became everyone's hero. If there was a need for something, I fulfilled it. If there was not a need, I'd create one. I wanted to have something to do. And from that point on, I don't think I have ever had a love interest for whom alcohol was not a problem. I mean, that was just part of the deal. And I was developing a compulsion to control chaos. And if there wasn't chaos, I'd facilitate something. We were going to have something jihawing around. One of the perks of living overseas was that we got to come back to the United States once a year. It was just a trip to come back and see families. It was one of the things that was in part of my dad's contract or whatever. And we got access to duty-free cigarettes and liquor. And my parents were on point about making sure we always had our full complement of however many cigarettes and liquor. And mind you, half the time they didn't even smoke, but they always drank. Making sure we always had our complement of the amount of liquor you were allowed to go in and out with. Usually it was 6 bottles per adult. So if we get our, requisite 12 or 18, depending on what we had, and start giving it out to people, then the next time you flew overseas, you could add on to it. So one time I took a bottle of the liquor. It wasn't mine to give, but I just went and got a bottle of scotch, because my cousin had arranged for us to go to a party, and she had fixed me up with a date, and he was some good-looking football player from her school, and it was her idea. She said, that'd really be nice. You could really grease the skids if you brought a bottle of that fancy scotch that your dad has in there. I said, well, think no more. I went in, got myself a bottle of scotch. We went to the party, and I was a big hit. They loved it. And I figured out then that I could keep shining if I just threw a little booze around. I didn't have to imbibe, but I could certainly be the one who was, there with it. And that was a good little taste of power, too. Back in Australia, my circle of friends was widening. Some of them were what many people would call undesirable. And a lot of our socializing was in unsavory neighborhoods, places that my parents wouldn't want me to go. But I had to make sure that I found out a way to be able to do that. I did not want to turn down any invitation. So I came up with this, my famous inability to lie scheme. And what I did was I started this little fiction, basically. I'd go up to one of my parents, usually my mother, but I did it a few times with my dad because I wanted to create the illusion that I was incapable of telling a lie without laughing. So I'd come up with something absolutely crazy to say, and I'd just start dying laughing. So they think, oh, poor Doreen, she can't even lie. She just breaks out into peals of laughter anytime she tells a lie. So that worked beautifully because I could tell them anything and they just bought it hook, line, and sinker. And so here I was wheeling and dealing. I was amassing more power and control, so I thought. And ironically, every time I left the house, my father said to me, remember who you are. Well, I didn't know what the hell that meant. I didn't know who I was. He certainly didn't know who I was. He would have been mortified if he knew who I was and what I was doing. But at this point, looking back, I certainly did not see this at the time, but my disease was creating a characterological conflict between my value system and my behavior. And that was something that I had never, ever experienced before. It was a little disheartening, but not so much I was going to do anything about it. And I started doing crazier and crazier things because my friends were drinking more and more, and I had to up the ante on my craziness to keep up. One night, my boyfriend had left a pair of rugby shoes in the back of one of his friend's panel vans, and the friend was a long way away from where we lived. It was a 7-hour drive. And we took off in the middle of the night to go fetch his rugby shoes, sat down, had a beer for breakfast, and then came right back in time for him to play in the afternoon game. Now that was very unsafe. These roads, this was not interstate travel. This was just, craziness, and I'm just going along with it. And a few years into it, and bad things started happening to my friends that were alcohol related. But as crazy as that was really my time to come into my glory. There were a lot of interpersonal conflicts. There was a lot of familial discord. Well, I mediated. There were a lot of accidental teenage pregnancies. I helped them get prenatal vitamins. Some people dropped out of school. I helped tutor them to get their GED equivalents. Some people lost jobs. I helped them come up with resumes. Some went to jail. I visited. Some were killed in alcohol-related accidents. Well, there wasn't much to do in that case. In fact, when I was 16, my boyfriend, who was a lifeguard, drowned. And there was a wedding people had gone to. I was unable to go. I was having a shower for someone. And after the wedding, they stopped off at this river that was renowned for being an unsafe place to swim. And they jumped in, were swimming, they were drunk, and he got caught in an undertow and just drowned. And I remember, we lived in kind of a remote area. Not many people had telephones. We did have a telephone at our house, but it was for I mean, anyone could use it, but the reason we had one was for business purposes. And so I didn't even know that he died until the next day. I was at a little harbor festival we had, and I still remember the music. They were playing Marshall's portable music machine, which I didn't like, and I sure as hell don't like it now. But someone came and told me that he had died. And, you know, that was the first time that I lost someone that was really close to me. And, you know, I refer to him as my boyfriend, and that's probably a little too strong a word. You know, at 16, when someone dies, it's easy to go back with that angst and kind of romanticize the relationship into more than it was. But he certainly was someone that I cared about. And it was sad to think about him dying. A few months later, my best friend's boyfriend died in a car accident. And she had often admonished him about driving crazy, and he was always drunk when he was driving. And she said one time, what am I going to do if something happens to you? What am I going to do if you die? And he said, well, just come and pour beer over my grave. So after both of our boyfriends had died, we came up with the most idiotic, histrionic scheme you could ever imagine. And that is, on Sundays, after my mother had had 2 dinner parties in a row on Friday and Saturday, we each took one of her leftover floral arrangements, and we went to the beer fridge and got 2 big bottles of 4X beer, and we went to the graveyard. And we put flowers on each of our boyfriends' graves, and we poured beer over the graves. And we did that every single week for a long time. She may still be doing it today, but for the fact that the floral supply dried up after we moved away. So, you know, and when we were there, the flowers were all ready just to put down, and you could use them as they were. But the beer had to be opened. But never fear, I always carried a beer opener in my purse because I did have a servant's heart. And we didn't have to, you know, worry about that. And then I also, at this point, decided I wanted to quit school. A lot of my friends had gotten their 10th grade certificate. They called it a junior certificate there. They were working. They were really having a better life than I was. My parents, to say they were not keen on me dropping out would be an understatement. So I decided I had to take matters into my own hands, and I decided that I would just start acting like I was stupid and start making bad grades. And that was a hard thing for me to do because of this. That conflicted with my need to always be right. So I did it for a little while. It did not seem to faze my parents. No one paid attention to the fact that all of a sudden I was making these bad grades. And after a while, even I couldn't stand it anymore. But that need to be right, and not only did I have to be right, I had to make sure you were behaving rightly too. We had this new boy at our school. He'd only been there, he was an American, and he'd only been there a few days. And this was a Catholic school. I wasn't even Catholic, but I insisted on going to this school because my boyfriend was going there. And the only reason my parents went along with it was because we had this thing in my family that you could go to any college you wanted to. And in Australia, some of the private high schools are referred to as colleges. So I used that as my argument that I wanted to go to this school. Anyway, I got in, and this new boy, they came around to the classrooms and would, like, you know, say, if y'all want to go to confession or if you want to go to whatever. And a bunch of kids would leave the classroom and go. Well, they came and gathered up people for confession. Well, I paid no attention to them. This was in a science lab. I was in the back of the room, but I looked around and later noticed that the new boy was gone. And I thought, oh no, he's not even Catholic. You know, poor thing, he shouldn't go to confession. So I got up, went and told the teacher and said, you know, that new American boy is not even Catholic, and he's been, you know, somehow subsumed in this whole confession movement, and it is going to be traumatic for him, and, you know, you got to do something. So he dispatched some other boy in the class to go run, fetch the new boy, bring him back to save him from the despair of going to communion. And so I'm in the back of the room, with my little science partners. And of course, I've got the best seat so I can see everything that's going on. And I see the dispatch boy come back, and the new American boy come back. And the new American boy goes over and talks to the teacher, and they're, in animated discussion. And then I notice that the new boy starts walking towards me, so he's real cute. So I'm getting myself ready just for an onslaught of accolades, thanking me for intervening and saving him from this horrible thing, and how kind and considerate I must be. And he comes over, and rather than doing that, he looks at me and hisses and says, "I am a Catholic. What would you expect from a Thibodeau from Louisiana?" So just one more example. And then my family then moved to Jamaica. And I was a senior in high school. It was a rough time to move. It was a rough time politically to be on the island. There was a contract on my dad's life for most of the time we were there. There was a national state of emergency that was declared pretty often. It was a dark time. But naturally, I managed to secretly glom onto an alcoholic, and that was hard to do there. We lived in this little bitty gated community, and I was at this international school. There were only 4 people in the senior class. And to add insult to injury, I had to take some 11th grade classes to meet the matriculatory standards for the school because I had not had American history or American literature. But anyway, the teachers took pity on me and let me participate in some pantomime they were doing to raise money for the rugby club. And unrelated, some guy who was involved, who was just a friend of a teacher, was someone that I just became enthralled with, and he naturally was an alcoholic. Everyone called him an alcoholic. I didn't understand why they said that. He was such a nice guy. He was so much fun, but it just goes to show that I would have definitely found him anyway. So then we went on to college, and college was good. I met a lot of people. My roommate's father got us a job at a hospital one summer. I guess I was I don't know, it must have been my second year in college. And I worked on the alcoholic unit, and she worked on a different unit. She hated it, she quit. I loved working with the alcoholics. And I started dating someone there who was also an alcoholic, but he was in recovery. So that was nice, because I didn't have to placate him. He was doing well, he was performing well, and I just, I wanted to help him. I wanted to do things for him. It's harder to do things for an alcoholic in recovery than someone who's actively using, but I found a way. I was pretty busy. I now was back to, after my little time of acting stupid, I now was back to saying, okay, I don't have to act stupid in college, so I can perform well. So first off, I had to make straight A's. Then I had to make sure that my A was the best A in the class. And then a 4-point wasn't good enough, so I had to take honors classes because that would jerk up your GPA. And then I figured out if you took graduate classes for undergraduate credit, that could also jerk up your GPA. So all this is going on, and I decide that I am going to help my new boyfriend by doing some of his professional work for him. He was doing these, I don't know, let's just say histories and physicals or whatever of people, and he would give me his raw notes, and I would just write them all out so that it'd be easy for him to dictate. And it wasn't a violation of confidentiality because we didn't ever use the patient's name. It's just like, patient is blah, 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 blah. Well, it took me at least an hour to do each of these, and I probably did about 10 a week. So it was just absolutely ludicrous to think that I am just frittering away whatever free time I had by doing something. But it's because I wanted to be special. I wanted to be important. I wanted him to tell me what a fantastic writer I was. I wanted him to tell me just no one in the world was as genius at compiling this data and making it flow in such a wonderful manner. And, I did it. It was, people would look at that and say, oh, he used you. He did not use me. I insisted on putting myself in that situation. I wanted to be used. I just couldn't resist that. So he is actually the one that introduced me to Al-Anon. He thought that I could use a little help. Like, what are you talking about? You're not even drinking, I don't need Al-Anon. But we went to, and this was before Red Stick per se, but in 1978 there was a local AA convention in Baton Rouge, and it was at the old Belmont Hotel. So we went, and he said, look, we're going to go to this convention. You're going to like it. There are going to be a lot of good speakers. I'm like, oh, yeah, great. I love it. So we go, and he had pre-registered us. His name tag had AA on it. My name tag had Al-Anon on it. I'm like, Al-Anon? I'm not really a member. But we went, we heard the Al-Anon speaker, we heard some AA speakers, and then there were concurrent meetings going on. So he went to AA, I went to Al-Anon. So that was my first introduction. And then I didn't, it didn't really click for me. I got busy. I didn't say I wasn't going to go back, but I just didn't go back. It just didn't work out for me to go back. So a few more years elapsed, and then he and I are no longer dating. I'm out of college at this point. He wanted to get married. I wasn't ready to get married. We remained friendly, but we kind of just went our separate ways. And then I started work. I got out of college. I started working, and my best friend had a real, he was just a raging alcoholic. He used some other things too. And I thought I could tolerate his drinking until I could figure out how to fix him. I used him as a date for a lot of my company events. At this time, I'm working at CDU. It's the chemical dependency unit here in town that was associated with the Baton Rouge General. It was wonderful. I loved working there. Practically all of my peers were in recovery. It was just a fabulous place to work. So I would use my best friend, as a date to a lot of company functions. And he often showed up drunk and stoned, but he was charming as hell and very, very witty. And I really have never seen so much fun and excitement wrapped up in a single human being. He was just always game for everything. And my fantasy was that people wouldn't notice that he was drunk and stoned. So what I'm saying is that, all these genius diagnosticians that I worked with day in, day out, who made their living diagnosing alcoholism and drug addiction, would not notice someone who was stoned and drunk just because they were funny? So my denial now is running deeper and deeper. And I was worried to death about him, but not so worried that I didn't always keep a nice big bottle of Tanqueray and fresh limes, because I'm always going to be a good hostess, But I finally things deteriorated quickly in that case. He became delusional, and that was the beginning of his real descent. And he started going down quickly, and that really scared me to death. He missed deadlines. He asked me to call in sick for him, which I did very credibly. He asked me to cover speaking engagements for him, which I did. He asked me to meet with his clients. He was no longer able to keep his commitments. He was no longer dependable. And that's something I really value in a person, is dependability and being committed to your commitments, doing what you say you're going to do. But I overlooked it in his case. He was drunk and disorderly in public. He engaged in a lot of really nasty confrontations. I started keeping my own schedule clear at times when I knew he had things to do professionally, so I could hop in and cover for him if need be. Now that meant I had to work, my work weeks were much longer, because if I'm going to clear out my calendar to pitch hit in case I'm needed, I'm going to have to do my other work in other hours of the week. I didn't care. I just stretched that work week out, and if I was working 60 hours a week instead of 40, if it meant I could be of service in that way, that was fine with me. Anyway, he ultimately had a very public fall from grace, and that was devastating. He lost everything, his house, his professional license, everything, and we tried in vain to help him, and we will continue to try to help him. But at that point, I was recognizing that sometimes the best thing I can do is absolutely nothing. I can't love my alcoholic sober, and I cannot hug my drug addict straight. So it was then that I decided I needed to give Al-Anon another try. And I went to a meeting at Broadmoor Methodist. I knew several people there. And I was really kind of looking around, and I was very upset that some of those people had been coming for so long. I'm like, what is wrong with you people? There are only 12 steps. I can knock these out over the weekend. Thought, these dimwits, this isn't the right group for me. I want to get in with the, fast track here. And so I did, though. I decided rather than just go to meetings, I'd actually work the steps, get a sponsor, and take a look at myself. And that was hard. It was really hard for me to do. One of the things that you taught me in the beginning, though, was that I did not have to quit loving my alcoholic. And that is, one of the best lessons that I could get, because it was a relief for me. I'm such a dichotomous person anyway. And you taught me to quit stealing other people's feelings. Just because my alcoholic is angry doesn't mean I have to be angry. And that was another game changer for me. I don't remember this at the beginning so much in terms of our terminology, but lately I've heard the use of the term qualifier. And when I first heard it, I'm like, well, for heaven's sakes, hold my coffee. There's some people in here, because they've got one alcoholic, I've got a whole slew of them. No wonder recovery's hard. So I'm continuing, even though I'm now really working a program of recovery, at this point my own illness continues to keep me from living my own life, because I'm so invested in helping other people. I, want to keep fixing things. I'm no longer making independent plans and that type of thing. And someone pointed out, there was a reading somewhere from an Abraham Lincoln address, and basically the gist of it was, giving help not asked for is really just criticizing. And that really struck a chord with me, because I give help all the time, whether you ask for it or not, whether you think you need it or not. I just love being needed. I loved being in charge. And I finally figured out that I will never graduate from Al-Anon. Too much of my self-worth is tied up in my hustle. And I feel like I was, still now to some degree, but certainly then, I was always in competition with myself. Anytime I approached a goal, it moved. Perfection obviously is unattainable. There's no way I'm ever going to achieve that. So about this time, God brought Ron into my life. And at first I thought he's just some other alcoholic, to cross my path. I was working hard. I had long, demanding hours. It was very gratifying work in a soul-sucking kind of way, but I loved it. I wouldn't have had it any other way. I was working a loose program of recovery at this point, but relying a lot on past laurels and kind of living in recovery type things. I was still working at CDU, and we had this little program for getting help for poor adolescents. The Lions Club had donated a lot of money to us, and we could put people in treatment who couldn't afford it. And Ron was working, he'd been through treatment. He had been working at the substance abuse clinic, and he had this patient that he wanted to refer to me to put through treatment for the Lions Club, or in the Lions Club fund. So we had about $100,000 for this fund, which was a lot of money in the 80s, young 80s. And I had to kind of come up with a deal for the Lions Club to let them see that we were really prudently administrating the money that they had given us. So I said, okay, and I had to talk to, I mean, this was not just me, believe me, I had to do some schmoozing with our hospital administrators and all. But I said, you know, I think what we should do is we cap the treatment cost, and we say a third of this treatment cost is going to be paid by the Lions Club. A third of it we're going to bill the poor people's family, and a third we're going to write off. So that's really the functional equivalency of saying that a third of it will be paid by the Lions Club and 2/3 of it I'm going to write off, because the poor family can't afford to pay. That's why they're, you know, availing themselves of this thing. So anyway, everyone bought that. We thought that was a good idea. So Ron has this patient that he's trying to refer. He calls me about it, and the only problem is his patient's deaf. Well, my treatment center didn't have any expertise in treating deaf patients, but the Tall Center had just opened. The Lake had the Tall Center, and they had a special program for deaf people. So I said, well, okay, we'll put them in this program. And the Lions Club said, well, you know, we raised that money for you. We drug you around to 1,500 different Lions meetings, and sometimes you drug a patient, and you put on a spiel, and people opened up their checkbooks. So now you're going to have to raise separate money for this kid to go to a different facility. So we said, okay, fine. And I mean, the Lions Club quickly donated for this child. So I called my friend at the Tall Center and said, hey, look, Sue, I want y'all to treat this patient. It's someone I would usually use our Lions funds for, but we've raised extra funds. But this is what I do. I bill a third, and then we write off basically 2/3. She said, okay, great. I'm happy to do the same thing. So this was great. Now, we work together all the time, the private treatment centers. Ron, however, thought that was just the most amazing thing he'd ever seen, that these two treatment directors at two completely different, you know, competing agencies would do that. So he called a press conference. So the press came, they talked to us and everything, and he was just rah-rah-rahing about how these two people had done all this. And so they wrote a little article and all. Well, then he promptly left town. He'd been recruited by another hospital, and he was moving away, and that was the end of that. Well, about a year later, I'm at a conference, and lo and behold, I run into him. And he's like, oh, it's so good to see you, you know, we'll have to get together, go to lunch or go to dinner or whatever. And I'm like, oh, fat chance. If you think I'm getting into another song and dance, you've got some woebegone child you're going to want me to, you know, do something for. So I had to run back to my office for a minute during the day, and the secretary says, who the hell is Ron Taravella? I said, why? She said, well, he's called about 5 times. I told him you're not even going to be back today. I said, okay. Well, he kept calling, so I finally agreed we'd go to dinner one night. I'd been out of town at another place I was consulting for in Lafayette and came back. I didn't change clothes or anything. We just went out to dinner, and by the time we got to dessert, it dawned on me this might actually be a date. Luckily, he did not have any sad woebegone case. But it was an unlikely union. You know, I was very waspy. He was an Italian Catholic. And even my precious mother, who ultimately came to absolutely adore him, pointed out to me that just statistically speaking, only about 10% of the world's population is alcoholic. And she doesn't understand what my preoccupation is with them, because it seems like I have always got one in tow. So anyway, being with Ron kind of helped to invigorate my program a lot. I'm not going to tell his story, though God knows I would love to. I do a real good job with it, I assure you. But I will say this, that I think he is one of the people for whom alcohol saved their lives. I think paradoxically that had it not been for addiction, he would have died at a younger age, or at a young age. Addiction provided a choice for him to recover. 3 cheers for alcoholism. This is the only fatal disease that I know of from which one can choose to recover. I've been fortunate in my work in treatment centers that my colleagues have always been in recovery. And that was helpful for my program, because we would go to meetings together. We'd talk about the program. I could consciously kind of rework my program, and I knew that I had to work the steps over and over again. At first, I did think that you just worked them one time. I didn't realize that recovery was dynamic, and it was something I had to keep doing. And, I met more and more with my sponsor. I was recommitting myself. And I was floored by some of the things I learned. I remember her having me make amends to myself in step 9. And she pointed out to me that them or others could also mean me. And I wouldn't have thought of that. There were little things like that that other people had to show me. It was not something that just came to me. I had to come to learn that I was responsible for my own recovery, and that blamers do not heal, and that my happiness is never contingent on the behavior of others. Ron and I got married. I was happy. I'd captured my very own little alcoholic, and he was a very promising one at that, He was working his program. He'd already finished his professional training. We moved around a little bit. We had a sitting duck baby who's grown into a remarkable woman. And I became embroiled in motherhood. It was fun. I was actively working a program back then, took on a back seat. I loved all of our slogans, but I hated that one, don't force solutions, because how the hell else is anything going how else can anything get done? If I didn't force it, it wasn't going to happen. So I sort of reverted back to my old self. I was hiding behind a lot of accomplishments. I wanted to be the best wife, the best mother, best room mother, best fair chair, the best community volunteer and all. And then in tribute to a midlife crisis, I decided to pick up and go to law school. Now, to say that Ron had a conniption fit would be an understatement. I didn't care. I knew he'd get over it. I went anyway. I just decided I wanted to do that. I do have a loosely construed plan for marital harmony, but sometimes I don't employ it. Anyway, those 3 years flew by. I did my thing. He still gripes that he had to pay for tuition, and now he has to pay for lunches and parking while I go down to the courthouse and treat people who do not pay me. But life has gone on. There have been some dark days. My parents have died. His parents have died. He's had prostate cancer. I've had breast cancer. Miraculously, we've both had surgical cures. Our daughter once, as an adolescent, had a recurrence of mono that was so severe they distrusted the original diagnosis and tested her for leukemia. And that was a really horrific time. Thankfully, she did not have leukemia. It was just a very bad recurrence of mono. And during those times, we did everything the doctors told us to do, and we prayed like there was no such thing as medicine. And we've been blessed that we have come through that. I've been busy most of my life telling people what to do, how to do it, letting them know that I think there's probably a better way. And not only that, I'm willing to give you the step-by-step things that you can do to get to that better way. And as I blurt out that stampede of these really great ideas, it has dawned on me and that what I'm saying, and certainly what anyone else with a lick of sense is hearing, is don't be you. And I can tell you, when I reflect back on that little gem, it truly breaks my heart. Who am I to be, so grandiose? I've been broken. I know a lot of you probably have too, and I've been carefully and wonderfully refashioned. And that the refashioning sometimes changes shape, changes colors, changes intensity. It doesn't always come easily, and it may not have come at all without the support of people in this room. I love saying that victory is reserved for those willing to pay the price. And of course, the price I've paid for recovery and the price I continue to pay is one of the biggest bargains in my life. Recovery hadn't come all at once, and there have been some very unlikely teachers along the way. And the challenge for me has always been to find the message in the hurt. I learned that my recovery is more important than my ego, and that's a powerful thing. People in recovery, my family in recovery, have listened to me uncritically and without any kind of judgment. We each weave our own recovery tapestry, and that gets rewoven lots of different ways. It's rich, it's got a variety of scenes in it. It's warmly patterned, some parts fray, sometimes we have to add new thread, but at the end it's going to be stronger, it's going to be brighter, it's going to be more beautiful than anything that we probably could have imagined. But what's more important is that it is uniquely ours. It's what we have created. It's what we continue to create. I've always have and always will love alcoholics. It's lagniappe if they're in recovery. And some of my favorite people in the world are in this room right now. My absolute favorite one just picked up her year chip. She's got almost 14 months now. I am indescribably grateful for that, and I'm proud and happy for her. My other favorite one is about to pick up his 40-year chip in April. Thank God, thank God, thank God. I'm living proof that the Al-Anon program works, and I know a lot of you are too. And a lot of you are also living proof that the AA program works. My commitment to recovery has ebbed and flowed through the years. The blessings have come in spurts. And, some of the crap never goes away. I've just gotten a little bit better at handling it. And I love that Al-Anon gives me the autonomy to work this program at my own pace. Although I've technically been in or around the rooms for a long time, I've obviously invested varying degrees of vigor to my program. The rooms are always open though, and lots of times in Al-Anon we have coffee. I know in AA you always have coffee. You wonderful people are always here, and you're always available outside the rooms. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. You've consistently loved me even when I was not too crazy about myself. Recovery's given me the gift of being able to be myself. And I can and do Zoom into meetings all over the world. That's one of the nice things about COVID, was bringing so many people, together via Zoom. And it's a safe place for me to work the steps. The traditions and concepts obviously are timeless in their eloquence. And I recognize that fixing myself is hard work. It's hard to do when I'm motivated even. But fixing someone else just isn't going to happen. My biggest character defect, and believe me, I've got a veritable plethora of them, is arrogance. And they're really pungent ones too. And although I've always thought that I could do anything, and I could probably do it better than most people, not because of any special skill set, but because there is no one more motivated than I am to be helpfulistic. I love the saying also, don't just do something, sit there, because that's something that I would never, ever come up with on my own. And when I do a 10th step at night, I look at what my part is in it, because that's the only thing I can change. And you know, I've got this delusional belief that I've got all this knowledge, and I really don't. I'm just like everyone else, and I come by that knowledge bit by bit, day by day. I still catastrophize, but you help me to change the what ifs into even ifs, because it doesn't matter what happens. Even if something happens, I can be okay. I've got the skills, I've got the resources. Even if the worst thing happens, I'm going to be okay. You told me to keep coming back, that it gets better. Well, I did keep coming back, but honestly, it did not always get better. However, I got better, and that's the superior outcome anyway. You know, my lifelong quest of tackling down and trying to fix alcoholics has not abated, but my higher power is always with me. And I thank God for alcoholics, because that's how I was led to Al-Anon. You know, I always say this too. I had an early sponsor once that really jumped me for using the words grace and mercy interchangeably. She said, you use those words like they mean the same thing. I said, well, they do, basically. She said, no, they don't mean the same thing at all. She said, grace is receiving something that you do not deserve, and mercy is not receiving something that you do deserve. So I'm trying to keep that straight now, but I still have to think about it. My life isn't perfect, but it is wonderful, thanks to Al-Anon and thanks to you. You people are my posse, directly and indirectly. I'm so grateful for the collective wisdom that's in these rooms. And, you know, the door will always swing out, but it may not always swing back in. So I recommit to my program every single day. Thank you for being here. I love you. What's the sleep?